I am so excited to welcome Carrie Regnier to get us started this afternoon. I first met Carrie as I joined Norton Healthcare, and I learned that she was really the go-to person for vaccines. It seemed like any question that I had, she knew. She was aware of approaches, and I was just so taken with her depth of knowledge and expertise. So when we talked about trying to put this program together, I'm so grateful that Carrie agreed to talk about really one of the first steps in implementation. And that is, how do we start getting everything ready for vaccines with respect to handling and management? So the morning session, we talked about the vaccines, we talked about the platforms, we talked about some of the risk factors and how do we actually get to the populations. This afternoon, we're going to talk about how do we actually get it done. What are the approaches that we need to make sure that we can do this work safely and effectively and consistently and reliably, all of those components that are important in making sure that our patients feel that they are the most important thing to us. So Carrie, are you able to share screen, and can I turn this over to you?
I think I can. Let me go ahead and do that. Can you see it, Ruth? Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Like Ruth said, my name is Carrie Regnier. I'm a director here at Norton Healthcare, and today I'm going to talk about vaccine handling and management. One of my favorite things about talking about this stuff is, even though a lot of it is things that we know and we always do, I think anytime we go back and review the information and look at all the resources that are out there, sometimes there's new resources and sometimes there's things that maybe we missed last time because we're busy, right? There's lots of things going on, and a lot of times you may not have time to dig into the resources. So I'm hoping that today you'll be able to go ahead and be able to tell us what the different resources that are available are, describe the principles and best practices of vaccine storage and handling, recognize a vaccine excursion, and perform the correct steps for validating that the vaccine is still viable, and then know how to transport and pack the vaccine in the event that you have to take it off-site. So the first resource that I want to share is the CDC at a glance resource guide. And even though the date on this is a little bit old, it does have some great resources kind of in one. And so in this presentation, I've got a lot of links, and many of them are from CDC or immunizegov or immunize.org, I should say. And they're easy links to follow. So this is one of the first ones. Then the next one is the CDC You Call the Shots program. It's an interactive web-based training. It presents information about the various vaccine preventable diseases, as well as information about storage and handling and the best administration processes. And I'll talk a little bit more about You Call the Shots further down the presentation. Next is the Pink Book. This is a source of truth book. Every immunization program should have this, or have it printed out so that it's available in your vaccine binder for questions or for as a reference anytime that you need something. It's available on CDC's website. You can order a copy, or you can actually just print it out. And it was just updated last year, so it's pretty recent. Next, we have the Vaccine Storage and Handling Toolkit. This was actually updated in April and includes COVID-19 information. So it's probably the best we have out there with all of the storage and handling information. Again, you can get it online on CDC's website and use that as a resource. And then lastly, for resources, immunize.gov, formerly known as Immunization Action Coalition. This is a website that I was introduced to when I got into ambulatory care and really started looking at our vaccine program. And holy cow, it's got clinic-specific tools, stuff for storage and handling. It has checklists. It has a lot of the tools that if you are a smaller practice or you don't have big teams of educators, there's really great resources to help you implement and sustain a good vaccine program. So now let's talk about some of the principles of storage and handling. So you guys know that success against any vaccine preventable disease is impacted by proper storage and handling. These vaccines are very, very delicate, very sensitive to cold chain, and we'll talk about that. So the temperature going up and down, and that the temperature being maintained. And if the temperature varies too much, depending on the vaccine, it can reduce its potency and its effectiveness, which in theory is really kind of shooting yourself in the foot for even administering the vaccine. With that, it's better to reschedule than to administer something that's been mishandled. And then big principle here, ensure your facility has a standard operating process for your immunization program. I think a lot of times people think, oh, it's just vaccines. We've just got to get vaccines in arms. It's easy. It's in the fridge. We're good. It's so much more complicated than that. And I'll talk a little bit about our journey with storage and handling and some of the lessons that we learned as we went through this. The vaccine coordinator. So let's talk about that role. It's the backbone of every successful program. You should really designate a primary and backup vaccine coordinator for every location that you have. And this is key. Make sure your vaccine coordinator has time and the resources for success. And I say that because just adding it on to your nurse that's in your clinic and saying, oh, you're the vaccine coordinator, and then they don't have time at the end of the day or the beginning of the day to look at the fridge and do the reordering and verify that the temperature guides are filled out, and I can go on and on. They've got to have time for there to be success. It doesn't need to be just a title and that's it. And so in that, I wanted to kind of review the responsibilities. You probably know most of these, but as I said a minute ago, ordering the vaccines, rotating stock, looking at beyond use dates, looking for expirations, making sure that emergency preparedness plans are available, overseeing vaccine transport, really being that source of truth and that expert when it comes to storage and handling for the vaccines. So if you don't already have this list, this is a great list to take as you're looking at identifying your vaccine coordinator or making sure that they're doing all of the responsibilities. So now let's talk about cold chain. So cold chain has to be maintained from manufacturer to administration. We're talking shipping all the way to that shot in the arm. And as I said a minute ago, the vaccines are so fragile and subject to damage by temperature and light fluctuations. That's why they always come in boxes that close. And, we know that some light sensitive medications are actually sent in like an amber colored vial or whatnot, but vaccines are stored in the box to help protect against the light. The thing you've got to remember is once the potency is lost, it can't be returned. So even if a vaccine gets a little too warm, you can't make it cold again to make it viable. And one big thing is that if vaccines encounter freezing temperatures, so 0 or 32 degrees Fahrenheit or colder, refrigerated vaccines that freeze can really destroy potency. And I've seen situations where the refrigerator goes into mode to cool it down and part of the fridge has frozen. And so part of you go to pull out the vaccine and the vaccine is actually frozen. And we'll talk about excursions and whatnot, but it's really key to make sure that your storage unit is even temperatured around it. So let's talk about vaccine storage units. So purpose-built or pharmacy grade are specifically designed to store vaccines. You can get them in compact, under the counter, or very large ones like you would see in a pharmacy. Household units are acceptable, but you have to have the right oversight with them. You cannot use frozen vaccine where in some places where the fridge isn't appropriate. So for instance, if you are trying to use a fridge and a freezer, you really need to have a standalone freezer. And I will tell you, we have seen when we put data loggers on household grade refrigerators, there's a defrost cycle. And those refrigerators will get really warm for a long amount of time. So if you don't have that continuous data logger, which we'll talk about in a minute, on your refrigerator or your storage unit, it's really key that you do that because you're going to see what happens with the temperature for a 24-hour period. Whereas normally you may think, oh, the fridge is on, we're good. It's not like storing your milk. It's consistent, appropriate temperatures. Also, with your storage unit, you need to make sure you have enough space for good airflow, that it's on firm ground, and the doors can open and close smoothly. I don't know about your practices, but we have practices in various places. Some of them are big and open and there's lots of room, but others, it might be a building that was maybe not designed to be a provider practice, but that's what it's been converted to. So there's a very small area for the storage unit. So it's really key that you make it a priority that storage unit has enough room when it is put into place. So some examples of purpose-built storage. On the bottom left, you can see that's a medication fridge. That's a smaller one. I talked about, or I may not have said it, but the dorm use bar style combined fridge freezers cannot be used. That's because the way that they're put together, there's not a good regulation between the freezer part, which is usually like a little tiny compartment, as well as the way that they hold temperature. But this one on the lower left, that's not a dorm style. That's actually a medical grade refrigerator that's just smaller. So you don't always have to have a large one like you see the Helmers on the right-hand side. And then in the middle, I've got a picture of the Dynavax, which is the all-in-one kind of, I think of it as like a vaccine Pyxis. And I believe that Dynavax is presented potentially as part of this education today, so you know more about it. But there's various things out there. So I say this to say, do some research, see what the cost is, see what the benefits are, see what your high priorities are for your practices, because there's likely a purpose-built unit and benefits to go with that. Switching gears just a little bit, talking about temperature monitoring. So I've got on here what the fridge and freezer maintain temperature should be. And then I've got some examples of what we call buffered temperature probe digital data loggers, or DLLs. So on our refrigerators and freezers, we have the log tags. That's what we use. But we do have some examples on the lower right-hand corner. That's actually a unit that is a remote unit. So it actually will let someone know via their phone, it texts, it emails that their temperature is out of range. So the nice thing is they have audible ones. They have, like I said, the remote monitoring ones. There's many different kinds out there. But when it comes down to the data logger, what you're looking for is you've got to have one that will provide detailed temperature monitoring every 30 minutes and that it alarms. We've had instances where you do your min-max in the morning, everything looks good, whatnot, and then in the middle of the day, the data logger starts going off. And sure enough, there's a potential excursion in the works. And had we not heard it, we would have never known. We wouldn't have caught it. So that audible part is really key. The thing is, you always want to have a primary logger for everything. So if you've got a fridge and a freezer, you've got to have one for your fridge and for your freezer. You also need a backup data logger for every unit, and that has two purposes. One, so that you can actually use that data logger to transport. So you need to keep your buffered solution in your storage unit so that it maintains the temperature of the storage unit, and then you just plug in your backup data logger if you need it. But also, it allows, if you've got to, if yours goes, and I'm not sure if what I said, but if it goes bad or if you need to actually do a transport, you've got another data logger to help you. And many times what I've seen, and we'll talk about transport, but many times what I've seen is one storage unit for transport, like one cooler, isn't usually enough for a substantial size practice. So it's good to have enough data loggers, not only for a primary and a backup, but to have enough so that if you have to transport offsite, all of your coolers will have a data logger in them. So temperature logs, those are available. Immunize.org has them, Fahrenheit and Celsius. One thing that we noticed is you need to make a standard. Is your organization going to look at the temperatures in Fahrenheit or Celsius? Pick one, because you don't want one practice doing Fahrenheit, one practice doing Celsius, and you've got potentially people going in various various float pools or helping out, and they get confused about what the temperature should be. It's much easier to pick one and stick with it. But either way, you need to record the temperatures twice a day and then post it on the outside of the storage unit so that everybody can see it and see what the temperatures are. And the nice thing about the immunize.org temperature logs is on page 2 of this, it actually gives you some information about if there is any fluctuation in temperature, kind of how you can write down a little bit of an action plan about what happened. Next, let's talk about temperature stabilization, or essentially you plug in a unit that's been turned off because it's either new or it's a repaired storage unit. And this is a piece that I think a lot of people miss when it comes to storage and handling, is the refrigerators can take 2 to 7 days and the freezers can take 2 to 3. So you need to set up a data logger and record the min and the max each day for 2 to 7 days. Once you get 2 consecutive days that it's in the acceptable range, that unit is stable and can be used anytime. You can go ahead and put your vaccine in there. But again, you've got to do this kind of preconditioning phase to let the storage unit get to the appropriate temperature and stabilize. Otherwise, your vaccine is potentially not going to be viable. Another thing too, and you should have copies of these signs. Again, immunize.org has them. If you don't have them, make sure you only plug 1 unit per electrical outlet. If you can, get a safety lock so that it doesn't accidentally come out of the plug. And then use the warning sign. You've got to remember, you may not be the only people in your practice. Usually it's cleaning crew, or maybe there could be maintenance people in your building at times. And sometimes they're just looking for a plug to be able to do something. And with this tag on there, that helps to ensure that they don't accidentally unplug it. You need to also look at your fuses and breakers and put a note on them that it says vaccine fridge, do not, turn off. And then you need to watch your power outlets when you first plug your units in to make sure that they're not outlets that can be tripped or switched off. I've seen in older practices where maybe on the wall you've got the light switch that'll turn things on and off. And those are not where you want to plug your vaccine storage units into. So how do you set up a storage unit? So I'm going to kind of go through the ins and outs of what you need to do once you've got that unit at the right temperature. How do you want to put your vaccine in there? So essentially, you need to store it in the individual original packages that the vials or the syringes come in, with the lids closed, in separate containers for each vaccine. Store similar vaccines or diluents on different shelves. So an example would be Prevnar 20 and Pneumovax 23. You've got 2 pneumonia vaccines that both start with a P. You don't want to put those on the same shelf close to each other because somebody could just glance real easy and grab it and they grab the wrong one. Make sure you position the vaccines and the diluents 2 to 3 inches from the unit walls, the ceiling, the floor, and the door. So it really needs to be inside just a little bit. And then if you're using a household unit, do not put it in the drawers. You also can't store it in the door of the household unit, but the drawers are a place that I have seen in the past where stuff can end up. And then one thing that we found, and I'll talk again, what we did here at Norton was CDC has these standard labels, and their standard labels, I've got an example here for Kenrex, which is a pediatric vaccine. It actually gives you the age, it tells you what it's used for, and it also tells you the route. So it gives you a good label for the outside of that bin that you're putting your vaccine in the fridge so that everybody can know what should go there. Other things, never store food and beverages with vaccines. I've seen that. People who maybe new, they come in and they think, oh, it's a fridge, let me stick it. No, never put food or anything else in there. If other meds or biologicals need to be stored, place it on the shelf above the vaccine and clearly mark it. And then make sure that when you're arranging it, you've got the nearest BUD or beyond use date, as well as the expiration dates in the front so that your stock is being rotated appropriately. I have actually seen situations where like there's been a basket and people have just like dumped syringes in there. And I'm going, oh my goodness, no, you can't do that. You need to make sure and have everything together in the box that came in. For stability wise, and I've actually read some articles as I was preparing for this, it is the recommendation to use water bottles on the top shelf, the floor, in the door racks of a household grade unit. There is some, literature out there that talks about, is this really something that's going to prevent an excursion? Does it help hold the temperatures? That's not for me to decide, but it is the recommendation that we still do that. It also helps prevent people from putting stuff in the door if you've got those water bottles there. And then if you're using a medical grade fridge, follow the manufacturer guidelines about whether you should have the water bottles in the refrigerator part. And I'll show you an example of a freezer here in a minute and kind of what we did there. Now, one thing that you should do every day, are the temperatures correct? Are the vaccines placed and stored correctly? So are they in the places they're supposed to be, or did somebody get in there like your child does at home and they move stuff around in the fridge and you're going, where did it go? Your vaccine fridge shouldn't be that. It should all be in a standard place. Is there opportunity for air circulation? So again, room on the sides, above and below to make sure that that air can circulate. And then are the doors sealing and closing correctly? Because especially with the household grade refrigerators, I've seen sometimes the seals can get really, they can dry rot or they get old, or you got to kind of really push it to make sure that it's closing. And even though I didn't see it in the literature, if you do have a household grade storage unit, I've seen some where you've got the fridge door that closes, and then maybe they've got an extra little, not necessarily a lock, but a piece to keep it where it keeps it closed. So you actually have to really purposefully maybe turn the opening so that you can detach it and open the door. That's kind of a thing to help with secondary to keep it closed. Okay, so now let's talk about what's wrong here. And on the one on the left, it's a little bit hard to see. So a couple things we see here is we've got some labeled baskets. Okay, that's good. But we've got drugs up here in the upper right-hand corner in the orange, stored behind vaccine. And then we've got, that looks like regular and high-dose flu in the back, just kind of shoved in. We don't, it's not just vaccines again, but there's a bunch of drugs at the bottom that are close to the walls so the air can't circulate. And then you can see there's other medications stored in the door and even in the bottom. If you look at the one on the right, it looks a little bit better, right? They at least have the water in the door. They've taken the drawers out of the bottom. But when you look at it, there's no labeling. There's one bin in there, but there's no labeling. So vaccines are just kind of everywhere. And I think it's a little hard to see, but I think at the top, there's something stored up there that may be a biologic that should not be up there. So without standard storage, these are the kind of situations you can run into. But if you look here, this is an example of what we have done. So what we have done is we have set up some standards, and I've got my next slide will kind of go through what that is, but we use the CDC labels. We color coded them. So every vaccine has its own color. I'll tell you, we went to Michael's and bought out, it was when they actually had individual paper that you could buy for different colors and whatnot. And we actually kind of bought out every color that they had, because we wanted to make sure and have separate colors for every label. And then we printed the CDC labels on that colored paper and laminated them, and then used zip ties to zip through the outside of these bins. And so every fridge and freezer was set up based off of the service line or the specialty. So for instance, you can see on the right here, this is a freezer. You can see the water bottles in the freezer that we could use for transport. And you can see the top is vaccines for children. The bottom is private. So we've got same vaccines, but for two different programs there, as well as it is set up where, for instance, this is a pediatric freezer. So every Gen Peds pediatric freezer looks this way. If we have, let's say, adult primary care, if they have anything in the freezer, theirs is set up a certain way. Same with the refrigerators. So we went through and we said, what do we have at our immediate care centers or our urgent care versus primary care versus a specialty like rheumatology or endocrinology versus pediatric primary care that pretty much has duplicate of every single vaccine depending on the VFC program. So we went through and mapped all of that out and came out with a standard for each storage unit. And so some more details about that process. As I said, the You Call the Shots program that CDC offers, that was one of the first things we did is we made all of our clinical staff, they take that training every year. It's so that they don't forget how to give the vaccines, the appropriate storage and handling, and that they know the most up-to-date information. We also invested in medical grade storage units for both our commercial and our vaccine for children program. I will tell you, medical grade, it's expensive, but when you do the cost benefit analysis of the cost of the vaccine and the benefits of giving appropriate vaccines to your patients compared with if you have excursions, you're going to see that likely that front end investment is going to pay for itself versus you losing an entire storage unit of vaccine, because the vaccines are so expensive. We also standardize our vaccine formularies. So to be able to have a fridge that says, okay, we're using this brand, we don't have 3 different types of flu shots or, X, Y, or Z. We actually standardized our vaccine formulary, and our pharmacists helped us do that along with our medical directors. So we took it to them and we said, okay, what makes the most sense for us? And we set that formulary to make it A, easier so that everybody knows what vaccines we're actually giving, and B, so that we could standardize the storage unit. And then, as I spoke to, we went through and we standardized all of the units. So those bins that you see, those wire bins, those came from the Dollar Tree. I don't know if they're still available, those specific ones, but we actually measured every single box that was, related to a vaccine box. And so you can see some of them, like this one on the top left with the purple is a little bit longer versus the one with the green is a little bit fatter versus the one with the yellow is a little fatter and a little longer. So we figured out which shape would be the best for those vaccines. And then we used the labels with the standard colors. And then we put the legend on the outside of the storage unit, if it wasn't a glass door, so that we could see what was where. So you weren't opening the fridge going, oh, I need a Shingrix. Where do I get that? And you're in there going, No, you could look at the outside and see where it was. So this was a little bit of a passion project. I will tell you, it took some time to execute because this wasn't the only thing that we standardized with our vaccines. We standardized our process and really the entire program. So I say that to say, bite it off in chunks. You can't fix everything all at once. Just, set up a plan with your timeline and the implementations that you need to do if you want to go through and really standardize your program. All right, so let's talk real quick about handling an excursion. So any excursion requires immediate action. The staff really need to notify the vaccine coordinator or the clinic manager. You need to sequester the vaccines immediately and label them do not use. You can leave them in the same unit if they are, if you need to, or you can put them in another unit, but you really need to label them do not use. You need to document that excursion in detail. The unit temperature, the room temperature, download your data logger, what inventory and other things are in the unit. And then you've got to contact the manufacturer or the state immunization program if it's a vaccines for children or another state or federal program that you have inventory for. And what they're going to do is they're going to guide you on the viability. So as I told you earlier, a lot of vaccines can't get too cold. So if you call and you say, I've got Tdap and these were the temperatures and this is what happened, then they're going to advise you and say, okay, because it was out of range for X amount of time, it's still good or it's not still good. And they will let you know. One thing to point out is this resource. CDC has this one-page resource and it is amazing. We actually put it on the outside of our refrigerators because it actually has the different vendor manufacturer phone numbers on it, and it walks through, here's what you do if you have an excursion. One thing that we actually did as well is we asked that, because we've got kind of a Norton system team that I was on, we asked that if you have an excursion, you need to call someone, myself, or it was a clinical educator at the time, and let us know you're having an excursion. Because I found a lot of times, even though people know this stuff, they're not ready for the excursion and they almost get a little bit flustered. So having somebody to talk to really helps them be able to feel reassured and get the right steps for the process. So transporting off-site, so excursion, or, you just need to move inventory either way. And sometimes your unit may gradually go out. We saw that with the data loggers as well. Like it may get a little bit warm, but it's not quite an excursion, but you're freaking out because it's close. Or you may have power issues. We have had situations where the power company has called and said, hey, we've got to cut power on this street to run X wire, and it's going to be out for 2 hours. Well, we want to plan ahead. So you need to make sure you've got a plan for where to take your vaccine in case you need to move it. Because if you catch it where it's starting to go out, or you know there's going to be a power outage, or maybe there's a power outage and you're watching the fridge and it's starting to get a little warmer and a little warmer, you need to have some place to take it. Some ideas are, do you have other practices that are around that you know or that are a part of your healthcare network that you can take it to? You need to make sure they have enough room. Is there a local hospital pharmacy? They usually have big refrigerators. So contact them and see, ahead of time, hey, if we need to, and I get in a pinch, can we bring our vaccine over there to you? And then there's also retail pharmacies, but you need to make sure you know where your stuff is going, because a lot of retail pharmacies have household refrigerators that I've seen just from being a customer there. Also, make sure that, excuse me, make sure you have your transport cooler and supplies ready. And that's what this download here is emergency transport of how to do it. So you need to make sure you've got enough supplies and enough room for your typical inventory. And I can tell you that especially during flu season, one cooler is not enough. You're going to make sure that you have conditioned water bottles. And what that means is you take that frozen water bottle and you run it under warmer water until you start to see water moving around and the actual ice kind of moving around in the bottle. Because you don't want just frozen and you don't want just cold. You wanted that quote unquote conditioned. And that can take some time. I have actually been where I have done a pack out and had a very small sink and there was no drain stopper in the sink. So it was really hard to dump the water bottles in. And so I put like paper towels in the bottom to kind of clog it up some until I could get enough water in there to soak them to condition them. So it's things like that that you don't think about until you're in the moment. And then obviously cardboard and packing for your cooler. And then you need to set up your data logger in the middle of the cooler and monitor the temperatures at least hourly. And then here is an example of how to layer the cooler. And again, this is that link right here that I showed you, but it's got some other information on it. But starting at the bottom, you're going to put the conditioned water bottles. Then you're going to put insulating material. So you're going to have the cardboard. Then you're going to have the bubble wrap or styrofoam. Then you're going to have your vaccines, diluent, and your data logger. And then again, it's kind of insulating material. So then you're building it back up. Styrofoam or bubble wrap, looking at your cardboard, then more conditioned water bottles, then closing the lid. The biggest thing that I found when it comes to a pack out is you might have a cooler big enough for your vaccine, but when you start putting all of this insulating material in, it's going to eat up your cooler, and you got to make sure that your cooler closes. So it's really important to almost, I'm not going to say practice this, but almost to practice it to make sure that your vaccine is going to fit and how many storage units you need. All right, so in conclusion, just to kind of wrap things up, make sure, number one, your vaccine coordinator has enough time to dedicate to your program. You need to set up standard operating procedures for your organization and a vaccine resource finder for each location. I will tell you, it is Murphy's Law that the vaccine coordinator, the backup vaccine coordinator, and the manager all tend to either be sick or somebody is out of office when the fridge decides to go kaput. It just seems to happen that way. So having a resource finder so that they can phone a friend and that friend can walk them through what needs to happen if it needs to happen. And then evaluate your storage plan. Is it just okay, or is it the best that it could be? And if it's not the best, what are some short-term and long-term things that you can do to make your program more successful and to meet the standards?